TVOT. The death of the remote control and the rise of the conversational UI. I'm Fabian Bergfeld. I'm the director and founder of TVOT SF Studios. We're a digital design agency based in London. Before I introduce our distinguished panel, maybe a quick context behind this idea of this panel. As a design agency and as a designer, we have been battling the constraints of input-output mechanisms as long as I can think. We're all really happy when the iPhone came out with the touchscreen, because it made design for phones that much easier, and it really caused a paradigm shift, not only how we design for things, but also enabled new business opportunities and so on and so forth. So I think what we're aiming to debate here is whether the conversational UI can cause or is causing a similar kind of paradigm shift in the TV space, on the big screen experience and beyond. So that's kind of the context of this panel. And we have, I think, a great lineup of experts on this panel. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves and speak a few words about what the conversational UI means to them, and then we take it from there. Great. And we have, last but not least, one more panelist arriving.
Apologies.
Yeah.
I should be late.
The more the merrier. That's the theme of our panel. Okay, why don't we start with you, Sean?
Hi, my name is Sean Johnson. I am the head of experience design for NBC Entertainment, part of NBC Universal. I oversee all of the designs for our products, platforms, channels, experiences, and services, as well as a lot of the content that is developed for those. I think, what was our question? Conversational UI?
Define the conversational UI.
So conversational UI, I mean, we've had a little bit of discussions previous on this. I mean, I think there's a lot of different pieces. What it is not, I think, is voice control. I think where we're really looking at and leaning forward is how we kind of define it is there's a consumer, there is context, and there is content. And how do we have that conversation in a more meaningful way that will allow less friction points and allow that user to have a personalized or tailored sort of experience around their needs.
Hi there, my name is Zane Vella, currently the Vice President of Product inside Comcast's cable video team. I was previously the CEO and founder of a company called Watchwith that was focused for many years on temporal metadata, or descriptive information about what's happening inside a video asset. And Comcast acquired Watchwith last year, and it's been exciting to become a part of a much larger company that has made such a significant commitment to voice. Does anyone here have the Comcast X1 at home? And the voice, you use the voice remote? Yeah, I think it's just like as a starter, like just from the number of nodding heads, voice has become such a common way to interact with video content in such a short period of time, and so significant for people who are doing that I think this kind of panel, like really thinking about the design implications of that, is super timely. On the question of what is conversational UI, again, I'll agree. I think it's really important to differentiate between voice control, just that simple idea of voice commands, and the idea of a conversational UI, which is really about the back and forth between the interface and that command. And we'll get more into it.
Good morning, I'm Scott Francis, CTO at THX. And at THX, we stand for the quality of the experience in the home and of the entertainment product. And the conversational UI is something that jumps out to us as being rife with a lot of technical challenges, including accuracy of voice recognition, being able to differentiate between real humans and recorded, played back humans. If you haven't seen any of the YouTube videos of various devices arguing with each other, they're great fun, almost as good as cats. And so we're working to solve those problems both on near field and far field recognition, the technology of it, the technology involved, as well as proving that accuracy of at least the device level control. If you can't get that right, the rest of it won't happen.
Hi, I'm Margaret Schmidt. I am Chief Design Officer at TiVo, and for the last 16 years have been responsible for the user experience across all the TiVo products. And for me, conversational UI, I define it as an in-context, two-way conversation with a device to fulfill a need or to solve a problem.
Hi, I'm Dewey Reed, and I'm the VP Executive Creative Director for CNN Worldwide. And we ship on a lot of these voice devices already. It's not very conversational. It's very much, I ask you to tell me what the news is.
I like Dewey's answer. I'm Arthur Ordunia. I think I'm the outlier on this panel. Thanks, Fabian, for asking me on, and thanks to Tracy, wherever she is. I think our intent for the day is to embarrass her as much as we can by praising her on every panel. I'm currently the Chief Innovation Officer for Avis Budget Zipcar. What? Before that, I was Innovation Officer for ADT Home Security and Smart Home. And then before that, Canoe Ventures and Bright House Networks. So kind of weird, can't hold a job. I really like the question that you asked at the beginning. And my answer is twofold. One is I think it's an angelic dialogue, all right? And what I mean by that from a consumer perspective is that it needs to be ongoing. It is absolutely contextually appropriate. I think everybody here is correct in a slice of that. But I also think it's something that is not just about content and programming. I think it's about answers, as you said. And I think it's something that's tied to us, not tied to any device. And so what I would like to see that conversational UI become is something that is extremely personal and something that is absolutely tied to learning all about what I need moving forward, regardless of what the context is, right?
So I think it would be really great to also get a sense, what real problems does the conversational UI solve? Is it just a matter of convenience, or are there actually real kind of challenges that it addresses directly and solves?
I'll start.
Yeah.
I mean, I think if you think of just your TV finding experience today, right, the discovery experience, it's a lot of screens of posters and strips of things that maybe the system thinks you'll like. And I think bringing the conversation into it, the ability to say, you know, I want to watch a movie, and if it can then do the guided piece of that, well, you think you want something dark or something light. Right? Oh, let's go light. Okay, you're thinking like a romantic comedy, and that is very different than digging in through strips or just kind of browsing at posters and saying, you know, what do I want, right? It can start telling you, and it can tell you about things, and it can ask you about things, and I think that's a problem that needs solving.
Well, I think, Fabian, it depends on how much deep intelligence is tied behind that end of the dialogue, right? If you've got it tied into Google Brain, for example, you've got a huge panoply of action. If you're tied into Amazon's, then you have a other defined set of actions moving forward. I think, but what I want is a contextual and a conversational UI that's multi-platform, right? And I don't think that exists right now, but I think somebody here will probably create it.
Just to maybe quickly pick up on what you said, because the problem of discovery is huge, and it always comes up, and there are a number of challenges there. So obviously, how to use the screen real estate to really show all these different options, but there are always vested interests, and as a platform like TiVo, for instance, is, you have to be relatively neutral, you have to accommodate lots of different interests, there's lots of metadata available. So when you shift it into the voice environment, one of the challenges we always had designing it, we said, oh, why don't you just put 3 posters? I just put 1, and then it's always like, which one? And are you going to be able to do justice to all your different, all the different interests? How is a conversational UI going to solve that?
I think it's worth saying conversational UI is a specific term of art in NLP, right? Like, so we have to talk about it on 2 levels. NLP, natural language parsing, natural language processing, people argue over the definition of it. Mm-hmm. NLP is a specific science about extracting semantic understanding from ASCII, right? From looking at text and trying to pull meaning from it. The term of art, conversational UI, specifically means a set of problems which deep learning techniques apply to to be able to now start to understand more than just specific sets of words, right? To actually be able to retain the context of a query when somebody has actually made a voice command, to be able to retain the context of that query and its response in the successive questions. So I love going to recommendations, but I think recommendations is actually a very different challenge space, which conversational UI techniques can be applied to. I don't mean to be a buzzkill. I just want to get at like it's a specific term of art.
It's one, yeah. It's
Yeah,
one
right.
subject, right.
That is around. I think if we want to talk about just the whole idea of creating interfaces that use voice, then we should be careful to not refer to that specifically as conversational UI.
Yeah.
That's a good point, because conversational UI has already been prototyped with chatbots via text, for example. I mean, that is a natural language conversation. Google already uses natural language search as part of their search phrases. So this is something that's happening already. It's not just tied to voice.
I think the ambition, and I think angelic is a nice word for it, it's this idea of actually being able to just talk about what, or ask for, or kind of have a, it's different, right? To be able to talk about what you want or what you're trying to find or achieve. And that is a hell of a lot more interesting.
Well, I think the interesting part is it becomes a relationship, right? With the technology, with the data, with the personalization. I mean, there's we've gone through, there's an individual basis, and how we have natural conversations in language is usually within groups, and how we're having it right now. Is it intelligent enough to pick up those nuances? Does it have the context of patterns, behaviors, data, image, video, all those types of things to be able to serve my needs? It's a bit of a concierge. There's invisible UI movements. There are anticipatory design movements. How can it help to benefit me to make selection and choices tailored towards my needs, and then still allow me that, I think what we were talking before, that guided path? When it's not one of those, how do I disrupt that? How do I bring in other areas that will open me up to a journey, right?
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you guys are, first of all, completely agree, which is probably not what Fabian wants. You want some conflict, right?
No, not yet.
I completely disagree.
We'll get there.
I think this is wrong. No, but it's interesting because the application of that, I think, is where I'm starting to see what you've all done with conversational UI. There's defined, it's not a defined interface, it's a defined user experience tied to the services that you have. It's interesting because this current, where I currently am and where I just was for the last 4 years, was kind of moving away from video, and definitely moving away from video and programming, and moving now, for example, in the smart home context, at ADT, we were working with Google Home and with the Alexa team around how do we leverage their expertise in conversational UI around a situation, right? Some of it was home control, right? It wasn't just turn on the lights, turn off the lights. It was how do I learn, to your point, from a sequencing perspective, how do I learn what this household wants to do?
Which are the lights?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh my God.
That's the crazy thing around context. Like, which
lights?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting, there's in-home environments, there's out-of-home environments, there's mobile environments, there's individual, group, family environments, different dynamics that are going to come into that. Auto environments now, I think, are the next step forward.
We just announced this week a relationship with Waymo, right? And so I can talk a little bit, but not too much about it. And we've got a panel at the end of the day on AV. But that's critical. I mean, conversational UI is the UI here. I mean, I'm now in a space where we want to keep people's hands on the wheel, and eyes straight ahead, right? So what's the best user experience for that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think it would be really interesting to sort of maybe interrogate a bit further. How far away are we from that reality, and what are really the key challenges? I mean, if you design right now, let's say, a big screen experience, or if you design the next car, could you, to go back to the death of the remote, could you get rid of all of that and completely rely on the conversational UI, or what are the key constraints that are still in place?
So I feel like there are two things, there are more than two things, but two that I will talk about. One, I think there is still some role for the remote in the things that are best done by muscle memory, right?
Right.
It's the, I want to fast forward, I want to hit pause, that you don't want to be yelling at the TV. It's to the commands, right? Some
Yeah.
commands are better done by touch. And then I think the other barrier, more than the technology, might just be what are people ready for? Like, at what point are you really comfortable talking with all of your devices? And I think that gets easier the more devices you have to talk to. It just becomes part of kind of the culture. And I still think, you know, we're in a place where it's like half of consumers say they occasionally talk to their device, right? There are people that use it every day, but that's like this.
Yeah.
So even more than technology, I think you see some other things.
And when you have multiple devices like that, is that, I don't know, at one point I'm saying, Siri or Hey Google or Alexa. I mean, I've got all those devices in my house and it goes crazy. I mean, it just is nuts. And I mean, really right now is that, you know, we are at such a basic level of conversational UI. We are at the command level. We're really just at the command.
Do you like to get them to talk to each other?
I do. I let them
kind of
get
fun,
them
right?
arguing.
I mean, you know, I think as well, like the idea of death of the remote. And I agree. There's always this tactile. Certain things need to be done via a remote. So I don't know if it's death of the remote. I think one of the things is the remote hasn't changed or evolved in decades, right? Where every other technology has matured at like a 10x sort of pace. So I think it's ripe for that change. The question is that I look and effectively, I've got two phones sitting over there. Those are effectively now what I'm thinking are my remote. How do those engage, right? So it's not a, you know, I've got 15 different remotes for all these different devices in my house. That's a problem. So I think voice UI and conversational UX and UI will help to resolve some of that. I don't know if we get away from the remote because we have one. Everybody in here has one, if not two.
And
right?
just very tactically, both for Comcast and for Apple, the remote has become the voice input device.
Yes.
Right? Like that may change. Like who knows? Maybe the idea of the ambient, always listening thing will become attractive to consumers. Like, I think in the meantime, the idea of, this is maybe one of those age things as well. I still like the idea of turning on the thing when I want it to.
Or turning it on.
Yeah,
Or turning it
when
on.
I want
Yeah.
it. Right. That's the other part of the conversational UI is the notion of always on.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people are completely banking on that. Did anyone see the announcement, I think, of Amazon Friends, I think it's called?
Yeah.
Or I don't know a lot about it. I read a press release, but it's basically the idea that you can authorize certain people who can just appear in your Alexa device unannounced. So it's kind of a virtual voice space or auditory space that, you know, they can just come in. By extension, they can also just hear. Right.
Right.
The ambient computing is definitely a really exciting thing, but there are some hard physical, real-world problems with it in regards to acoustics. Being able to recognize and pick up that signal in a far field in a high sound pressure level environment. We don't quite have a level of device physics yet of the microphones that can do that when you have when you're playing a movie at volume. Yeah, the THX guy is talking about loud movies. Yeah, and so when those are playing loud, you're not going to be able to communicate with your Alexa to turn the lights down. That is a problem we're working on. It's a problem that's in front of industry. We got a lot of top people at our company and other companies working on that. But that is going to put that dawn of having that truly ubiquitous fog level of computing off by probably many years.
Well, and the other piece of that is also the user context. When it is far field, it either really needs to understand the context, or I have to be really specific and say, Alexa, tell me news from CNN, as opposed to when I talk to the device, we at least know I'm targeting the TV and I'm targeting that space of content. And so it's both a user and a technology barrier.
One of the nice things about starting conversational voice UIs with entertainment content is that people are generally more tolerant with it. I mean, the light switch is a really efficient, well-refined device that's pretty simple and works well. You know, it has infinite data retention. It only stores 1 bit, but it stores it for a really, really long time. It's robust, reliable, it loses power, it comes back to a state. You know, so having something that goes up to the cloud and does a device shadow and then difference mapping and then queuing it back and forth seems a little bit overkill. But if I ask for a movie and I get Jet School by accident, then, you know, I'm a little tolerant. Say, no, not that one. Give me the other one.
That's true.
So I think you know, there are obviously implementation challenges, and there are some challenges about bringing the user on board to make them sure that they know how to use it, and there's probably a whole new vocabulary they need to relearn how to speak to a machine. But I'm also interested in understanding, so there's a reason why we have set-top boxes, there's a reason why we have different platforms, and you know, there's a big challenge with voice on is it on platform level or on an app level, who does it pay justice to? How would you sort of see that being resolved in the future to ensure that your brand is adequately presented, that you sort of do kind of prioritize the service in a way that's sort of transparent to the user? Is this going to be by platform level, or is it completely open-ended?
I think it goes back a little bit to what Arthur said, and that was this is a really high-stakes game for the future. Like you probably can't underestimate what a high-stakes game it is for the future in terms of actually thinking about. It sounds brutal, but right, it's really about consumer ownership.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right, because those clouds of voice become the next stage for computational control, which is advertising and commerce. So then, like Google, Amazon, Comcast, like these are massive platforms of users and data, and I think we can start thinking about content as being distributed in those different voice platforms, in the same way that we used to think about content being distributed by different MSOs. It's just those platforms are raising up to different levels of different families of devices and different underlying systems that support them. And that cohabitation that Dewey mentioned, you know, probably goes away because people get comfortable. They get into their groove. They have their comfort levels and their combinations of devices, and you don't really move between them.
Right.
Yeah.
And we're pretty much an unusual audience too, because we generally have all devices, and most people will pick one, two.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I mean, I think that it's going to be a significant challenge. I think it goes into that deep level of personalization. I mean, the infinite choices out there, we tend to narrow back into what is our behaviors, what are our habits, how do our habits relate with our friends and families, and those are things that are informed by people, right? So that level of personalization, I think, you know, is going to change the dynamic and the feel of how content is ultimately developed and distributed.
Well, and I think...
No, go ahead.
I think the question is then also who has the data. So if our voice experiences need to be different, need to be personalized, in order for you to interpret what I really meant, you need to know what my past history is and all of that. And if there's one device in the home doing all this ambiently, do they really have the data to do that sensibly, or are we opening APIs to do all of that? So I think that's another interesting question. Yeah. Where's the data live for the personalization?
Well, you want to ask a question?
Just quickly, where do you think we are between this command/navigation? Okay, 100% of my use of the X1 is a specific show, get me there because a keyboard is a pain in the ass, and
I think
discovery.
I think the industry will largely say that we're just starting to solve the problems of true conversational UI as a term of art in NLP.
In terms of usage, are people picking up and having a conversation with the remote and trying to get to do a discovery experience, or are they going, here's a specific channel or program?
I have not been directly exposed to any specific data around that, so I'm speaking only from observation. But people learn very quickly that they don't need to have "Good morning, Google. please tell me if my newspaper has been delivered? Like that old Knowledge Navigator video from Apple.
That was
Like-
pretty good.
Like,
Wow, nice callback.
we do not need to use full sentences when we are speaking to computers, right? It's like people instantly get down into the like CNN.
Yeah.
Boom, you're there. It's like, so voice is another, it kind of goes to the macro point. Voice is an ingredient in user experience design, and understanding how people use voice differently with machines is, I think, the exciting frontier that we're at, because we can now start to actually look at the logs. You can look at the logs and actually see what people are saying.
And then to really be the disagreeable one here, if voice is voice the solution in the future? Phones are no longer primarily used for voice. So is it only going to go to the navigation level, and when I want to do more of a discovery, there will be other thingies to do?
You mean like the brain control?
Not that far.
It'll fundamentally be multimodal, right? Just like
Yeah.
just like we as humans communicate multimodally. I'll call you, I'll text you, I'll set an in-person time, I'll email you something. We'll sit down, we'll use our hands to talk, we'll use manipulatives. I mean, we're multimodal, and the interfaces have to evolve to be multimodal as well. Voice is just the next mode being added in.
Yeah.
I do want to add, sorry, David. I do want to add on top of what you said about some of the challenges that we, and I think a lot of the challenges that folks in the audience will do in terms of relearning or learning anew how to actually create a VUI, right? So I've seen this now. I've gone through this exercise twice, once in the last company and once here. Really, really bright UX people that we have, never done a VUI, right? And it is a completely different exercise.
Yeah.
It's a completely different. How many here have worked on a team or had a team that did a skill or has done a skill for either Alexa or Google Home, right? So you've seen the flows of what a VUI looks like.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, the
It's
flows
completely
are
different.
incredibly intricate, challenging, not natural. by
Not
any
natural.
means, right?
No, it's definitely not natural.
And I think that's a great example, because when you look at those, and imagine going through executive reviews with those, by the way.
Oh,
it
it was
completely
fun.
changes the dynamic and the shape to
It was
drop
really
one of these
fun.
in and show the context and the flows of these. I think to that point, right, that, going in, you had mentioned something earlier, is like, what do people prompt? And there's the people that are going in that absolutely know what they're looking for. And then that point of discovery is, I think, the challenge part. That's the natural part, which is what we've been talking about, which is how do we, without that personalization, without that natural sort of language, which is a whole nother level. There's different contexts, there's different voices, there's different, my 7-year-old speaks to this entirely different than I speak to it. And I think that's a unique sort of area. I will say one thing, and close out on my end, is cultural anthropologists and linguistics people are going to be very valuable very quickly.
Highly, yes.
Right?
Already.
I mean, it's a whole new field for us to look at.
There's a reason why one of the leaders in this area was called nuance. Like, it's just like the layers of trying to decipher. Like language is complex.
And the language is by location and behavior and context, time of day. All of those things shape the patterns on how we, whether I'm in the car, whether I'm outside on the street in front of my hotel.
Who else is with you?
Right. Who else is with you?
I wanted to go back to your question about adoption rates. So we're seeing extremely high adoption rates, and people are actually really learning these commands. We've been refining them and to the UX point. I mean, literally my physical UX people that used to do chips and cards and everything else like that are learning the user flows of these things, and it's super complex. But the adoption rate is, we're really amazed at how high it is. And Echo Show is about to come out, and we're one of their partners that we're releasing with them. That one I'm going to be really interested in watching.
That's going to be that will be. I'm not going to say cool yet.
I'm not going to say cool yet either.
Let's
wanna
just go
see
back
it.
to the gentleman's
I wanna
question.
play
with it.
It's not an either or. It's an evolution, right? It's like it starts with voice command, and it's from voice command you start to actually bring on other kind of capabilities into the voice tool that that can move towards the conversation. And I think it's valuable to think of the conversation in the UI right now as aspirational. That's really where it is.
And that will build the user comfort as well, right? So they're used to commands because they can remember them, and you can say Game of Thrones, and then from that, we can get you to try other things.
You know, the funny thing is we are at conversational right now because every time I say something to Alexa and she says, I don't know what you're talking about, I yell at her.
That's nice.
Another
like
question, okay?
Yeah, sure. So I noticed a couple of call indexing with end-screen media, which is working. I noticed a couple of interesting trends in the TiVo Video Trends report. First off, it seems like the number of people that have access and the number of people that are using seems to be stuck at about half the people that have access are using. Now, it's growing, but you don't seem to get beyond half. The second thing is, in the last couple of reports, what I've noticed is that the number of people, the frequency of use, particularly in the last quarter, fell. So what that tells me is that people, as you say, it's aspirational. They come to voice with a whole bunch of aspirations and find them, to a good proportion, unfulfilled. So my question is, are we poisoning the well? Are we training people that voice control doesn't do a whole bunch of stuff it will ultimately do? And will they just never ask? Because I know I've been well trained by Alexa, as you have. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that yet, right? So I don't ask anymore.
Well, I think it depends on the type of content. With the CNN content, I mean, people like going about their daily routine and hearing the news, you know, without having to watch those talking heads on television. So I think it depends on the type of, and it also just depends on the answers you get back. With the CNN stuff, I mean, we've simplified it so much that it's very easy to get the news. And you can actually get Wolf Blitzer's voice and Anderson Cooper's voice and things like that. So you're not listening to an electronic voice. So I think people are getting a little bit more satisfaction out of it that way. And plus, they can catch up with the news really quickly.
So I think one thing I'm curious about with the conversational UI is actually go back a little bit to ownership. And you know, you all work for different companies, and I think ownership is something that, at least where we work designing TV solutions, and that's brand and attribution, is always incredibly important. How to negotiate a templated solution to more bespoke solutions, how you have specific brand vocabulary that signposts like this is my space, to create loyalty, to create essentially for upselling, all those kind of purposes. If we sort of imagine a world where the conversational UI takes over, you do not want to talk to a different UI, so to speak, every time you're in a different service provider, a different context. It undermines, I think, what the conversational UI used to promise. However, it begs the question, you know, how are you going to differentiate between an NBC and a CNN? Is it going to be, you know, is it going to be because recognized voice? Is it just voice, or what does the future look like?
Well,
or is it just going to be Google and Apple and all the key players?
We're building an audio palette now. So it's alerts and heads and tails and the way we seam things together so we can brand our stuff. Right. So I mean, so audio is just a big part of it, but now instead of building bumpers and interstitials and things like that for television, you're building audio palettes.
And that's metadata. The definition of content is changing, right? As a video owner, video owners are increasingly looking at not just the layer of video and the layer of audio as the asset they distribute, but the metadata that describes that episode, the list of characters, and now, even more so, the metadata of descriptive terms, right? Do you, as a creator and as someone who's in the business of trying to get your asset seen everywhere, do you want to just leave it to the, you want to just toss your video out there and see if it gets discovered? Or do you actually want to be prescriptive about the data that is important? And so something like the key terms, something like the actual data track, and then now I think that's what Dewey just mentioned is a great example, actually being able to include an audio bumper, the amazing thing is, right, the technology is followed by experimentation, and the experimentation is followed by lawyers.
Yes.
Okay? It's like, so you get the technology, and then you get experimentation,
Yeah.
and then you get lawyers. And then the lawyers codify the experimentation and technology into deal structures that then become content flows.
Right.
Right? And so it's all of these things. I mean, people joke around, right? We're all like what was your line, Dewey? He said, I've been failing at interactive TV for 20 years. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
At least I gave him credit for it. It's a good line. You know, we've all been failing at interactive television for 20 years. But that idea is, it's because of that cycle. You know, great, tech exists, then you figure out these ideas. It will take years for Dewey's audio bumpers to make it into a content distribution deal where those will then come as the package of assets, and somebody on the other end will, like, when you're playing a CNN clip, you'll hear their audio bumper at the end. But it will actually take people who have kind of codified that through deal and tech to say, when I want my audio bumper to play. Right. It's, you know, and the truth is somehow this crazy system works. Like, you can now download a video on your phone and watch it on the bus, and your resume point works when you get home.
So Fabian, I like that, the visual image that you just had in my head about what follows a steamship, right? Two things about what you raised up. One is that for the foreseeable future, I don't see an end to it. There will be multiple agents that we're talking to, right? I think that's there's the thought of an Uber agent, which was my wish list, will not happen, right? A personal agent, sure, right? But one that can, but every time, depending on what, in some cases, the context of the service, right? Mm-hmm. You will be talking to another platform conversationally. So that's one. Two is the ramification of that, and I think where the natural sort of new power structure is going to be around integration and context, right? Because if you think about it, think about who we are as a profile. What we like to watch, what we like to eat, everything, right? And think of those as data segments, parts of our profile that actually exist in silos today. Very, very, very little integration or the ability to reach in seamlessly across those silos. But there has to be, all right? If we really want to get to that kind of full 360 contextual knowledge of us, and context, again, is key. There needs to be access across those silos, which will be a business relationship, right? It'll be a transactional relationship, not a technical one. The tech is the easy part, right? Although security is going to be a bitch. So that's one, is the transaction. And the second is it will be conversational when you think about how you need to actually access and what's given back to you. But the context engine or engines that will drive that based on the integration, who owns those, right? And those are already being built, as we know, because those are context engines thinly disguised as transactional frameworks.
Right. I think what's missing here is a tech split. I mean, I agree with you that it is a business relationship, but there's also a tech split that's missing in terms of the conversational interface or the agent interface for the service provider or the business, and then my personal agent. And I might have those two agents connect with one another. Yeah. We have a model for this in the existing world. It's called a personal assistant. Right. A personal assistant can make you hotel reservations, can make you car reservations, can solve your banking problems, other kinds of things, until you get to the point where they need to speak to you and you need to authenticate. And then you have to deal usually directly with that service provider's agent themselves. Mm-hmm. Why would conversational UIs not follow the same pattern?
Exactly.
Because it provides a division. It allows me to pick an appropriate personality or persona that I can relate with, who understands me, and I embed my context within that person, within that agent. And that agent only discloses the appropriate selective bits to the service provider. I think this is an awesome way where privacy can come back.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think that's
where
a powerful
I stop
concept.
having to give away all my info to everybody I want to do business with, and I own my info.
Yeah.
And I think from my perspective, from our world and a design perspective, we're looking at it exactly like that, right? It's the idea of number one, it's a language. So language has to communicate And to your point, I have a personal assistant. That assistant has to deal with a service assistant as well. So there's a communication in between those two as well, which is the next layer. But if if I simplify it down to what it is still from the same thing. We're looking at a system design as well. It's a brand system at that point. So there is, again, I go back to personality, tone, and voice. How deep does that get for what our service is? How does that service then, or that personal assistant, work with other services? Do they communicate before I get that checkpoint, that handshake back, and that authentication? And how much am I willing to allow those two assistants to communicate back to provide me with the right level of personalization, context, detail? Is it, do I have enough data to inform me that my Starbucks coffee is waiting for me on the drive, right? And I just go in, pick it up, transaction's already complete, the assistants have all communicated. So it's beyond, content, entertainment is great. I think it is people are more accepting of that. It is a little bit of a gateway drug. But when you start to fan out from there and you look at, the auto industry, you look at hotel industry, you look at transactional industry, that is really where you start looking and going, holy crap, like this is happening. These connections are there and they're happening around our space right now.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's my approach.
So before we open up to the audience for questions, on what platform, on what context, on what environment do you see that the conversational UI will come first? Is it going to be in the living room? Is it going to be in the car? Is it going to be, even in terms of industry, is it even going to be TV, or is it going to be more on the transactional side of things? Where are we going to see the innovation happening?
I think, Fabian, reverse your question. I like your question, but reverse it. There's very little places where it's not, at this point.
Let me ask you why I'm asking that question, to give a bit of context. I sometimes feel that on the big screen, on the TV UI, I think innovation lags because there are a lot of constraints. What you talked about, it goes down to legal. There are deals and there are content and there are various providers, and very quickly your head hurts because there's so many constraints you have that in some other industries you don't have. And if you look at sort of Paris, there are more degrees of freedom.
So, okay, good question. It's interesting. The smart home the last 5 years was kind of the wild, wild west, right? And that's why refrigerators get hacked at this point. But that will continue to be, and not just the living room, but any room. I think that'll continue to be an incubator for a lot of failures and a lot of successes. Some successes, a lot of failures. I love the idea about, you're absolutely right about the light, by the way. Let's improve that. Let's not. But I also think, and I'm a bit biased because of where I am right now too, I think that a captive audience, a driver, right, or a passenger in there, that is also an incredible incubator for new services, new propositions, right? And you will also quickly learn what is valuable quickly or not as you go through.
Yeah, I would say you can do it in the living room today, right? I mean, I think it's a defined space. I mean, we have conversational services we make available to operators. I mean, you can know the entities, you can know the context, you can have access to the content. I think you will also be able to do it in other places where you can define the context. Like if you look at inside the car, what are the things I'm likely to be saying inside the car? And I think those are sometimes easier challenges than being the device that does everything, that leads to great disappointment, that causes people to stop trying, right? You want to build, the minimum delightful experience. What are the things I know that every time I say it, it gets me to what I'm looking for, and how do you build on that? And I think the living room's a great place around entertainment to start.
I agree with all that. I think that there are two factors that will drive mobile devices to actually be the area where that happens most effectively. And I think the first is the computational power of the device. Like we are constantly upgrading these things. It's like this is really CPU intensive and it's really bandwidth intensive. And so television networks are largely mired in historical infrastructure where these mobile devices have incredible computational capabilities. Was it a month ago, Apple made announcements about some AI chips going in the phone itself, right? That's what it's for. And the other part would be the field of predictive computing, right? Actually, the whole world of like just basically trying to say, based on the GPS, based on the time of day, based on historical patterns, et cetera, you put those two things together and you're not actually trying to boil the ocean all of a sudden. And so the voice conversation stuff can really happen fast.
Yeah.
And I think everything else will have a hard time keeping
Yeah.
up with that advantage.
I think it's on two fronts. I think because of I think the way that people's behaviors are, right? Your home, beyond even your family room or your living room, is a space that you feel safe in. Your car, right, is very personal to you and who you invite into your car. So I think those are the areas where I think voice UI makes a ton of sense. And then I would say the mobile computing power again. That is, again, context, location. That goes into all of the data throughout my day that exists. I have that in my pocket. How does that feed the other entry point? So when I'm out, I'm more restrictive about what I share, right? I'm not going to have open conversations because of security and all these other things when I'm out in the field.
Your phone's going to know you're in your car before your car knows you're on the phone.
Exactly.
Probably, right? So, I mean, a great example is like on my morning commute, I listen to NPR. And so, but I also have the CNN Alexa skill sets and things like that. So if I can prompt that before I get home and know that I want to catch up on something that I've heard and that's ready to go, then that's great for me. That takes all of the business. I've utilized my time in my car when I'm ready to go when I get home, and that takes a lot of the thinking out of it for me. So
we're almost out of time. So it sounds to me the remote isn't quite dead. I don't know whether we ever get rid of the remote.
It's as dead as the set-top
But we
box.
have lots of means and mechanisms to override the pain of the remote. Just quickly, we actually did have the little questionnaire that we put out. We got actually 1,200 responses, so there's actually a significant data pool there. And about half the people said that voice is going to inform the future, the TV of tomorrow, to sort of mirror the theme of the show. And the other half sort of fell into AR and into data. Great, have your vote too, to keep continuing that. Are there any questions in the audience? Yes.
I'm Jeroen from Machine. We make interactive experiences for TV and video. And you guys have been talking a lot about voice, and we actually been playing around with voice, and it doesn't work for conversations while you're watching a show because you already have audio. So we decided to focus our conversational efforts on text messaging. And for instance, Facebook Messenger is a great platform to interact with something while you're watching it. So just wanted to get your thoughts on messenger platforms and chatbots rather than voice from conversational interfaces with TV and video.
Yeah, to the point earlier when we were talking about natural language processing, conversational UI does not mean only voice. Voice is one modality for it. That conversation can take place via text, via interactive conversation, chatbot, as you've experienced. And also, you can layer voice on top of those experiences. Many of the problems you're talking about have to do with the acoustic path that's going on. Whereas when the mobile top becomes the remote and you're tweeting and entering Facebook Messenger via something that's in your hand, the acoustic path is very different. And that entry point could be voice in that handheld.
Any other questions? It's coming.
Privacy, when you have the always on, the consumer, I'm sure, has a lot of concern about being listened to in their own home, where you expect privacy. Now I have Google or Amazon listening to me. Are we going to see that people are shaping the way they allow that machine to work, and maybe we're not seeing a natural way that people would be interacting if they didn't feel like they're trying to sell me something?
So I think that, yes, we do see that modification behavior. When I go around a number of people's homes, I constantly see the red ring turned on where people have enabled
Microphone
privacy mode. And it's only when they're actively interacting with it. I think current technology and current devices, the privacy concern is somewhat overstated at the current level, but it's understated in terms of the long-term impact, which is common human behavior. In the long run, I think these things, again, split. You will have agents that are personal to you, that you trust, and you might opt for a cheap one where your privacy guarantees are weak, or you might opt for a very expensive one where it's been certified by some outside group, say somebody who certifies a lot of home theater equipment. Just for example. And where we certify that it's a private system, and then that agent interacts with whatever services you want to use.
Do you think the data coming back from kind of those different scenarios is going to be informing the the data, somebody's doing it where they feel the privacy.
Yeah.
It's going to be more natural where it's not.
Yeah.
And is that setting up different experiences?
There's a way to handle this. We prototyped a lot of this some years ago at Technicolor as well, where we started moving service requests out for bid across multiple services, and we would dither those requests. In fact, we would randomly inject errors. So that we would enforce a privacy wall of what we knew was accurate coming back to us.
And I think if you didn't have to worry about privacy, you can imagine an ambient UI that's always listening.
Yeah.
You're not asking, it's offering, right? So you're having a conversation. It's like, oh wait, I know Alexa says, I know the answer to that, and just offers it to you. But they're all the privacy concerns that keep people from, wanting to be in that world at all.
I would say, it's and not to be like ageism, because I'm one of those people that straddles the line where I'm highly concerned about privacy. But again, watching, emerging generations and my younger kids, they just don't care. I mean, probably until they're hacked and you find out, but it's
Or don't know.
Or don't know, right? It's up to me to inform them that to your point, like having that red sort of marker. But there's a lot more acceptance of this, and I think we have to understand that's coming. Right?
I think
getting the hook.
The final word I say, because you said it, which is the issue of trust. I think a prediction is these popular voice agents, I think that needs to and probably will become an objective for them at this point, and they will actually be very forward and very clear and transparent about saying you can trust us.
Right.
So part of those elements, I think that's what we will start to see.
Thank you very much. We're being kicked out. Thank you.
This is Tracy Swedlow, Editor-in-Chief of Interactive TV Today, and you can find out more at itvt.com or more about the show, the conference, thetvoftomorrowshow.com. Speak to you soon.
And I'll just rock, 'cause I'm so future shocking. Help me and I'll just rock.